Rain had a way of making New York feel quieter than it really was. The streets still groaned with taxis and distant sirens, but under the soft blur of water against glass, even a city that loud could sound lonely. Daniel Brooks noticed things like that. Maybe because loneliness had been sitting beside him for most of his 42 years. Every morning before sunrise, he drove the same faded blue pickup across the Williamsburg Bridge with a thermos of black coffee balanced beside an old metal toolbox that rattled every time the truck hit a pothole. The heater barely worked. The windshield squeaked. And the driver's side window had to be pushed up by hand. But the truck still moved forward. So did he. Daniel worked maintenance for Sterling Estates, one of the oldest private properties on the north shore of Long Island. Most people there barely looked at him twice. To them, he was just the tall black man in worn work boots carrying ladders through marble hallways while wealthy people discussed mergers over catered lunches. Quiet. Reliable. Forgettable. But there was a discipline to him that didn't belong to the way people judged him. The kind of discipline built from years of swallowing anger before it became damage. The kind men learned when they had children depending on them. Every Friday night, after his shift ended, Daniel stopped at the same grocery store and bought the same things for his son Malik. Peanut butter cereal. Chocolate milk when it was on sale. Apples if they looked fresh enough. Malik was 12 now. Thin shoulders. Sharp eyes. The kind of kid who noticed when his father skipped dinner and pretended not to. Daniel never talked much about sacrifice. He just practiced it quietly. That Thursday evening, rain rolled across the Sterling mansion in silver sheets, washing the long driveway in reflections from black SUVs parked outside. Inside, staff moved carefully through the estate preparing for another high-profile charity event hosted by Victoria Sterling herself. Daniel could always tell when she was home before anyone said her name. The atmosphere changed. Conversation straightened. People walked faster. Victoria Sterling was the kind of white woman magazines called timeless. Elegant without trying. Sharp cheekbones. Blonde hair usually pinned back in polished perfection. A billionaire heiress who carried herself like someone born into rooms where other people had to ask permission to enter. But Daniel had also noticed something else over the years. She was rarely cruel. Distant, yes. Guarded. Exhausted in a way expensive clothes couldn't hide. But not cruel. That mattered to him. More than people realized. He was replacing a flickering light fixture near the west hallway when he first heard the twins laughing upstairs. Amelia and Noah Sterling. 6 years old. Running where they weren't supposed to run. One nanny chasing after them while balancing a tablet and 2 untouched dinner plates. Daniel smiled faintly without looking up from the ladder. "Slow down before one of you ends up flying through a wall," he called calmly. Noah stopped first. "Mr. Brooks," the little boy grinned. Amelia cheated. Did not, Amelia shot back immediately. Daniel shook his head, tightening the fixture. "That's what every guilty person says." Amelia laughed so hard she nearly slipped on the polished floor. For just a second, the hallway felt warm. Human. Then the sound came. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a sharp shift in energy somewhere deeper inside the mansion. A door opening too fast. He looked down instinctively. One of the security men moved quickly past the hallway, hand pressed against an earpiece. Another followed behind him. Something felt wrong. Daniel climbed down slowly, wiping grease from his hands onto an old blue rag tucked into his pocket. The laughter upstairs faded. Somewhere beyond the grand staircase, a woman gasped. Then silence swallowed the house whole. Real silence. The kind that arrives before bad news speaks out loud. Before we go deeper into what Daniel discovered that night, tell us where you're watching from and do not forget to subscribe, because what happened next changed the course of several lives forever. 10 minutes later, every television inside the mansion showed the same image. Rain crashing against dark ocean water. Red emergency lights reflected across broken waves. A helicopter reporter speaking too carefully. Victoria Sterling's private aircraft had disappeared off the Connecticut shoreline. Daniel stood near the back of the staff corridor while whispers spread through the mansion like smoke. Lawyers arriving. Security locking gates. Phones vibrating non-stop. Wealthy relatives appearing almost immediately, some still wearing tuxedos and diamonds from another event across the city. Strange how quickly grief and money learned to occupy the same room. Noah sat alone near the staircase clutching one of his mother's silk scarves. Amelia stared blankly at the television, too young to fully understand death but old enough to feel the fear inside everyone else's breathing. Daniel watched from a distance at first. Staff weren't supposed to interfere with family matters. Men like him especially knew where invisible lines existed in houses like this. But then Amelia quietly asked a question no adult in that mansion seemed ready to answer. "Mr. Brooks," her small voice barely carried across the marble floor. Daniel turned. The little girl looked at him with trembling eyes while thunder rolled outside the massive windows. "Are me and Noah still going to live here?" And for the first time that night, Daniel Brooks had no idea what to say. The storm stayed over the Sterling estate long after midnight, pressing rain against the tall windows like restless fingers. Inside the mansion, grief moved differently depending on how much money a person had. The lawyers whispered behind closed doors. Executives arrived with tense expressions and polished shoes still wet from the driveway. Expensive watches glimmered beneath chandelier light while voices discussed emergency meetings, company shares, security protocols, and the future of Sterling Holdings. But not once did Daniel Brooks hear anyone ask what 6-year-old twins were supposed to do without their mother. He stood near the service hallway holding a mop he had forgotten to put away, listening without appearing to listen. Men like Daniel learned early how to become invisible in wealthy spaces. The trick was simple. Keep your head down. Speak softly. Never make powerful people uncomfortable with your presence. Across the foyer, Amelia sat curled into one corner of a leather sofa with Victoria Sterling's scarf wrapped around her shoulders. Noah leaned against her, fighting sleep even though fear kept pulling his eyes back open every few seconds. Children did not always understand death, but they understood absence immediately. Daniel knew that better than most. 12 years earlier, he had stood in a hospital hallway holding baby Malik while a doctor explained that sometimes hearts simply stop too early. He remembered the way silence changed after that conversation. The way ordinary sounds suddenly felt cruel. Coffee machines humming. Elevator bells ringing. Nurses laughing down the hall while his own world collapsed quietly inside his chest. That kind of memory never fully left a man. Maybe that was why he kept glancing toward the twins when nobody else did. Near 1 o'clock in the morning, Victoria Sterling's younger brother finally arrived. Richard Sterling. Perfect gray suit. Silver cufflinks. The smell of expensive cologne drifting ahead of him before he even spoke. He moved through the mansion with the confidence of someone already calculating ownership before the funeral had even been planned. Daniel watched him kneel briefly in front of the twins. "Everything is going to be handled," Richard said carefully, though his attention kept drifting toward the lawyers gathered near the dining room. Amelia looked up slowly. "Are we staying together?" For a moment, Richard hesitated. Just long enough for the truth to show itself. "The adults are figuring things out," he answered. It was not cruel exactly. Worse, maybe. It was detached. Noah lowered his eyes after that. Daniel noticed it immediately. Children always knew when they were becoming problems instead of priorities. Something inside him tightened. He walked quietly toward the kitchen instead, giving the family privacy they probably did not deserve. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly above the empty counters. Someone had left untouched champagne glasses beside trays of catered food now growing cold. Daniel poured 2 small glasses of milk and found a package of chocolate cookies hidden behind imported mineral water. A few minutes later, he returned to the twins without saying much. "Kitchen closes in 5 minutes," he said gently, setting the tray down near them. Noah blinked. "Really?" Daniel nodded once. "Best cookies in New York. But only after midnight." Amelia almost smiled at that. Almost. The kind of almost that hurt to witness. Daniel sat on the edge of a nearby chair while the twins ate quietly. Rain tapped against the giant windows behind them. Somewhere upstairs, lawyers continued discussing assets worth more money than Daniel would see in 10 lifetimes. Yet down here, 2 frightened children clung to warm milk and stale cookies like survival. Then Daniel noticed something strange. Amelia kept staring at the old silver watch on his wrist. It was scratched near the edges and too worn for a mansion filled with luxury. "My mom knew that watch," she whispered suddenly. Daniel froze. "Very slightly." "What do you mean?" Amelia swallowed. "I saw her cry once when she looked at it." Noah looked up too now. "She said your name before the helicopter left tonight." Daniel felt the room shift around him. Quietly. Dangerously. And for the first time since the storm began, he realized Victoria Sterling might have left behind more than grieving children. Daniel Brooks barely slept that night. By 3 in the morning, the Sterling mansion had settled into the kind of silence that only followed disaster. The rain eased outside, leaving thin streams of water crawling down the giant windows overlooking the dark Atlantic shoreline. Most of the guests had gone home. Lawyers remained. Accountants too. Men in expensive suits carrying folders thick with numbers and signatures moved through the estate like grief could be organized into paperwork. Daniel stayed because someone had to stay. He found Noah asleep against the corner of the sofa with Victoria Sterling's scarf still wrapped around his shoulders. Amelia was awake beside him, knees tucked against her chest, staring toward the fireplace without blinking much. Children who lost safety too quickly often became quiet first. Daniel understood that. He walked over slowly and draped one of the house blankets across both twins. Amelia looked up immediately. "Are you leaving too?" she whispered. The question landed harder than she knew. Daniel paused before answering. "Not tonight." Amelia nodded once, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket anyway. Somewhere upstairs, raised voices suddenly echoed through the hallway. Sharp. Controlled. Angry in the polished way wealthy people argued when they did not want staff hearing too much. Daniel glanced upward instinctively. Then he heard Richard Sterling say something that made his chest go still. "The children cannot remain here indefinitely." Silence followed that sentence. Heavy silence. Amelia heard it too. Daniel saw the fear return to her face immediately. Noah stirred awake at the sound of voices. "What is indefinite?" the boy asked sleepily. Amelia did not answer him. She already knew enough. Daniel looked toward the staircase for a long moment before crouching slightly in front of them. "Hey," he said softly. "How about we get some air for a minute?" The twins followed him through the back hallway leading toward the service entrance near the gardens. Cool night air drifted inside once he opened the door. The storm had passed, but the world still smelled like wet pavement and salt water. Daniel sat on the old wooden bench beneath the covered patio while the twins stayed close beside him. The mansion behind them glowed warm and gold against the darkness, beautiful from far away in the same way expensive things often were. But beauty did not always mean comfort. Noah leaned against Daniel's arm after a while. Small. Exhausted. Human. "Mom said you fix everything," he murmured. Daniel let out the faintest breath through his nose. "Your mom gave me too much credit." "No," Amelia said quietly. "She trusted you." Daniel looked down at her then. Really looked. The same blue eyes as Victoria Sterling. Same careful way of speaking too. Emotion hidden beneath control. He wondered suddenly how often those children had watched adults disappear behind business meetings and charity galas while pretending not to feel lonely. Something inside him ached unexpectedly. The patio light flickered once above them. Daniel reached automatically toward his toolbox sitting near the door from earlier repairs. Habit. Responsibility. Small things needing fixing. He opened the worn metal box and searched for a screwdriver. Amelia's eyes widened the second the lid lifted fully. Inside, beneath oil-stained rags and old repair tools, rested a folded photograph tucked carefully into the corner. Victoria Sterling stood beside a much younger Daniel in front of a community center somewhere in Brooklyn. She could not have been older than 25. He looked barely 30. Both smiling. Real smiles too. The kind people rarely gave cameras unless they forgot the world was watching. Amelia stared at the picture in silence. Noah blinked in confusion. But Daniel froze completely. He had forgotten the photograph was even there. "You knew our mom before this place," Amelia whispered. Daniel slowly closed the toolbox, but it was already too late. The child had seen what everyone else inside that mansion had missed. And somewhere deep in the house behind them, Richard Sterling had just stepped onto the patio doorway, watching the entire moment unfold without saying a word. Richard Sterling did not speak immediately. He simply stood beneath the patio light with rainwater still clinging to the shoulders of his expensive coat, watching Daniel close the toolbox with careful hands. The silence stretched longer than comfortable. Noah noticed it first. Children always notice tension before adults admitted it existed. The boy moved slightly closer to Daniel without realizing he had done it. Richard's eyes lowered toward that small movement. Something cold flickered behind them. "It is late," Richard finally said. Calm voice. Controlled voice. The kind men used when they wanted authority to sound reasonable. "The children should get some sleep." Daniel nodded once. "I was just bringing them inside." Richard stepped closer onto the patio, polished shoes clicking softly against wet stone. "Actually," he replied, glancing toward the twins, "there have been discussions about temporary arrangements." Amelia stiffened immediately. Daniel felt it beside him before he even looked at her. "Temporary?" Noah asked quietly. Richard gave the same smile wealthy men often gave during uncomfortable conversations. "Not cruel. Just detached enough to avoid guilt. Until the estate settles and proper guardianship is reviewed." Daniel watched Amelia's face pale beneath the patio light. 6 years old and already learning what uncertainty sounded like in adult language. He remembered Malik looking exactly like that outside a Brooklyn eviction office years ago. Children never forgot moments when the ground beneath their lives shifted. Daniel rose slowly from the bench. Taller than Richard by several inches, though he carried none of it like intimidation. Just quiet gravity. "They have had a long night," Daniel said evenly. "Maybe this conversation can wait until morning." Richard's jaw tightened slightly. Not because Daniel raised his voice. Because he had not. Men like Richard were used to people beneath them sounding nervous. Defensive. Grateful. Daniel sounded none of those things. Inside the mansion, another lawyer appeared near the hallway entrance carrying folders thick with paperwork. The woman glanced briefly toward Daniel before leaning toward Richard. "The board members are asking for signatures tonight." Richard exhaled softly through his nose. Annoyed now. Distracted. "Take the twins upstairs," he said toward Daniel without looking at him directly. "One of the nannies will handle them." But Amelia's small hand had already wrapped around the sleeve of Daniel's old work jacket. "Please do not make us go with strangers," she whispered. Barely audible. Richard heard it anyway. So did the lawyer standing behind him. The air changed after that. Tiny moments sometimes carried more weight than shouting ever could. Daniel looked down at Amelia's trembling fingers gripping the fabric near his wrist. Oil stains still marked the sleeve from work earlier that evening. He should have stepped back. Staff boundaries existed for reasons in places like this. But he did not move. Noah looked up too now, eyes tired and frightened. "Can we stay with you tonight, Mr. Brooks?" Richard immediately opened his mouth to object, but the lawyer interrupted first. "Honestly," she said carefully, lowering her folder slightly, "the children clearly trust him." Richard turned sharply toward her. "He is maintenance staff." Daniel said nothing. That hurt more somehow. Because it was true. He was maintenance staff. A black single father from Brooklyn with overdue electric bills, a 12-year-old son sleeping alone at home tonight, and barely enough money to repair the transmission in his truck. Yet somehow, at this moment, he was the only adult those children were reaching for. Richard studied Daniel again with colder eyes this time. Measuring. Calculating. "You have children yourself?" he asked suddenly. Daniel nodded once. "A son. And you think you understand what these children need?" Daniel glanced toward Amelia and Noah before answering. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I just know what it feels like to be scared." The words settled into the silence like truth often did. Heavy. Unavoidable. Even the lawyer looked away afterward. Richard adjusted his cufflinks slowly, frustration hidden behind practiced composure. Then he turned back toward the house without another word. But before disappearing inside, he paused near the doorway and said something that stayed with Daniel long after the patio emptied. "Be careful, Mr. Brooks. Attachment can become expensive." Daniel looked down at the twins still standing beside him beneath the soft glow of the patio light. Then at the toolbox near his feet. And for reasons he could not fully explain yet, he suddenly felt like his entire life was about to change. 3 days after the storm, every newspaper in New York carried the same photograph. Victoria Sterling smiling beside a headline filled with words like tragedy, legacy, and billion-dollar empire. But hidden near the bottom of several gossip columns was another story beginning to spread quietly through the city. Maintenance worker seen caring for Sterling heirs. Some articles framed Daniel Brooks like a loyal employee stepping in during crisis. Others were less kind. One late-night television host joked that every billionaire mansion eventually came with a mystery savior in work boots. Daniel ignored all of it. He had more important things to survive. The Sterling mansion no longer felt like a home after the funeral arrangements began. Strangers filled every hallway. Lawyers. Executives. Wealth managers. Publicists. Everyone speaking softly while calculating something behind their eyes. Amelia and Noah noticed it too. The children stopped laughing entirely after the second day. They barely touched food unless Daniel sat nearby. And every evening when staff tried taking them upstairs alone, someone ended up crying. Usually Noah. Sometimes Amelia too, though she hit it harder. On Friday morning, Daniel arrived at the estate wearing the same dark work jacket and carrying the same old metal toolbox. But this time security stopped him at the gate for nearly 10 minutes while new management verified his credentials. One younger guard glanced toward Daniel's truck and muttered something under his breath about people getting too comfortable around money. Daniel heard it. He simply signed the clipboard and walked inside anyway. Quiet dignity often looked invisible to people who had never needed it. Near noon, Richard Sterling called him into the library. The room smelled faintly of leather chairs, cold coffee, and expensive cigars that no one admitted smoking anymore. Sunlight stretched across shelves filled with books rich people displayed more often than read. Richard stood beside the fireplace while two attorneys organized documents across a long oak table. "Sit down, Mr. Brooks," Richard said calmly. Daniel remained standing. "I am fine here." One attorney looked mildly uncomfortable after that. Richard studied him carefully for a moment before continuing. The children appear emotionally attached to you. Daniel said nothing. Temporary custody arrangements are becoming complicated, Richard continued. Board members are concerned about instability. They lost their mother 3 days ago, Daniel answered quietly. Instability already happened. Silence settled across the room. One of the attorneys slowly removed her glasses. Richard walked toward the window overlooking the gray shoreline outside. You are a maintenance employee with a 12-year-old son, a rented apartment in Brooklyn, and inconsistent income, he said without turning around. You cannot seriously believe you are equipped for this. Daniel looked down briefly at the calluses across his hands. Grease stains still lined the edge of one fingernail from replacing a boiler valve that morning. The kind of details men carried when life depended on labor instead of inheritance. No, sir, he admitted softly. I do not. Richard finally turned toward him. Slight surprise crossed his face. Probably because honesty sounded unfamiliar in rooms like this. Daniel continued before anyone interrupted. But those children are scared every minute somebody leaves the room. And right now, they trust me. The attorney nearest the table lowered her eyes after hearing that. Richard exhaled slowly, patience thinning. Trust does not pay for private schools. No, Daniel replied. But it helps children sleep. The room went still again. Outside the library doors, faint footsteps suddenly raced down the hallway. Then Amelia burst into the room before anyone could stop her. Noah followed close behind, clutching one of Daniel's old work gloves against his chest like something valuable. Please do not send him away, Amelia said immediately, breathing hard. One of the house staff reached the doorway behind them looking embarrassed. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Tired now. Cornered in ways powerful men hated being cornered. Noah looked directly at Daniel, then asked the question that changed everything inside that library. If everybody else leaves us, he whispered, would you stay? Daniel felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward him at once. The lawyers. Richard Sterling. The frightened children. Even the staff near the doorway waiting for his answer. And somewhere deep inside himself, Daniel Brooks realized he had already made the decision before anyone asked the question out loud. The decision did not happen all at once. It arrived in pieces. In signed papers spread across cold conference tables. In sleepless nights staring at water stains on a Brooklyn apartment ceiling. In the sound of Malik coughing softly from the next room while Daniel sat at the kitchen table trying to calculate whether one paycheck could somehow stretch into feeding 4 people instead of 2. Some choices entered a man's life quietly before changing everything forever. 2 weeks after Victoria Sterling's funeral, Daniel stood outside family court wearing the only dark suit he owned. The jacket fit too tight across his shoulders now. The shoes had been polished 3 times to hide the age cracking through the leather. Beside him, Amelia held his hand while Noah leaned against his arm half asleep. Reporters waited near the courthouse steps hoping for scandal. Cameras always liked rich children and poor men standing too close together. Is it true you are trying to gain access to the Sterling estate? One reporter shouted as Daniel walked past. Another asked if he believed a maintenance worker could raise billionaire children properly. Daniel never answered. He simply kept walking with the twins beside him and Malik trailing quietly behind carrying Amelia's backpack without being asked. 12 years old already, but somehow older than that too. Inside the courtroom, Richard Sterling objected to nearly everything. Temporary placement. Educational stability. Financial concerns. Public image. The word sounded polished and expensive, but Daniel noticed something important. Richard never once talked about what the children wanted. The judge noticed it too. By late afternoon, temporary guardianship was approved pending long-term review. Amelia cried silently into Daniel's work jacket the moment they stepped outside. Noah wrapped both arms around Daniel's waist like he was afraid someone might still take him away. Daniel closed his eyes briefly against the weight of it all. Responsibility did not always feel noble. Sometimes it just felt heavy. That first night in Brooklyn, the twins stood silently inside Daniel's apartment staring at the smallness of it. One narrow hallway. Old radiator clanking near the windows. A kitchen barely large enough for one person to turn around in comfortably. The couch cushions sagged in the middle. Rain leaked near the fire escape whenever storms hit too hard. Compared to the Sterling mansion, it probably looked temporary. Fragile. But then Malik stepped forward holding 2 folded blankets under his arm. "You can take my room," he said casually, like generosity cost nothing. "I like the couch better anyway." Daniel looked toward his son immediately. Malik shrugged once. Quiet strength. Same as his father. Amelia stared at the faded superhero posters inside Malik's room. Noah noticed the stack of library books beside the bed. No marble floors. No private chefs. No ocean view. Just warmth trying its best. Later that night, after the twins finally fell asleep, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table with overdue bills spread beside a half-finished cup of coffee gone cold hours ago. The city hummed faintly outside the apartment windows. Somewhere downstairs, a neighbor argued over rent through thin walls. Daniel rubbed both hands slowly across his face before opening the envelope Richard Sterling's attorney had delivered earlier that day. Inside sat an offer typed on heavy cream-colored paper. A very large amount of money in exchange for voluntary separation from the children after 6 months. Enough money to change Daniel's life completely. Enough to repair every problem he had been carrying for years. He stared at the number for a long time. Then his eyes drifted toward the hallway where 3 children now slept beneath one roof because the world had collapsed around them. A soft sound interrupted his thoughts. Amelia stood near the hallway entrance holding Victoria Sterling's old scarf against her chest. "I had a nightmare," she whispered. Daniel folded the paper slowly before she could see it. "Come here," he said gently. Amelia walked over and climbed carefully into the chair beside him. No words after that. Just silence. Safe silence. The kind grieving children searched for without knowing how to ask. Daniel glanced once more at the envelope sitting beneath his rough hands. Then he reached over, turned it face down, and switched off the kitchen light. Years did not pass gently for Daniel Brooks. They moved the way winter moved through New York sidewalks. Quiet at first. Then suddenly everywhere. 1 year became 3. 3 became 7. The tiny Brooklyn apartment changed with the children growing inside it. Sneakers piled near the doorway. Science fair posters leaning against walls. Late-night homework spread across the kitchen table beside unpaid utility bills and Daniel's old metal toolbox. Life never became easier. It simply became fuller. Daniel worked every job he could find. Maintenance shifts during the day. Emergency boiler repairs at night. Weekend plumbing calls in neighborhoods wealthy enough to complain about water pressure while he worried about grocery money. Sometimes he slept only 3 hours before driving Malik to school and Noah to soccer practice across town. He rarely complained. Not because life was fair. Because children listened carefully when adults spoke hopelessly. Amelia noticed the exhaustion first. She was 13 by then. Tall like her mother. Quiet too. One evening she woke around 2 in the morning and found Daniel asleep at the kitchen table still wearing his work boots. Bills spread beneath one rough hand. Coffee gone cold beside him. The radiator hissed softly through the apartment while snow drifted against the windows outside. Amelia stood there for a long moment before quietly placing a blanket across his shoulders. Daniel never mentioned it afterward. But the next morning, he packed her favorite apple slices into her lunch without explanation. That was how love often looked in their apartment. Small things. Quiet things. Noah changed differently. Softer heart. Louder laugh. The kind of boy who hugged people without embarrassment. At 14, he once got suspended for punching another student after hearing somebody call Daniel, just a janitor. Daniel sat silently through the principal's lecture before driving Noah home through pouring rain. Neither spoke much until they reached a red light near Flatbush Avenue. "You never use your hands to prove somebody matters," Daniel finally said quietly. Noah stared out the rain-covered window. "Then how do you prove it?" Daniel gripped the steering wheel gently before answering. "You stay." Noah never forgot that sentence. Malik grew into the steady center of the family without realizing it. Protective without arrogance. Patient in ways boys his age rarely were. He helped Noah with algebra. Walked Amelia home from subway stations late at night. Took extra shifts at a grocery store once he turned 16 so Daniel would stop skipping dinner whenever rent increased. Sometimes Daniel watched the three children laughing over burned pancakes on Sunday mornings and felt something dangerous rise inside his chest. Peace. Real peace. The kind he had stopped believing belonged to men like him. But life had a habit of sending reminders whenever happiness became too comfortable. One October afternoon, Daniel was repairing a heating unit in a luxury condo downtown when sharp pains suddenly climbed through his side hard enough to steal his breath. He grabbed the edge of the boiler instinctively before the room tilted beneath him. Sweat gathered along his forehead despite the cold mechanical air surrounding him. "You okay, man?" another worker asked nearby. Daniel nodded immediately. "Just dizzy." Men raised to survive often learned how to lie while standing upright. The clinic doctor later used words Daniel hated hearing. Stress. Exhaustion. Kidney function concerns. Additional testing needed. Daniel listened quietly while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The doctor kept talking, but Daniel's attention drifted toward the family photo tucked inside his wallet. Malik in graduation robes. Noah smiling through braces. Amelia holding acceptance letters from private schools she once believed she could never afford. "You need rest," the doctor said firmly. Daniel almost laughed at that. Rest cost money. Medication cost money too. Even slowing down cost money. That night he returned home carrying groceries with one hand and prescription papers folded deep inside his jacket pocket. The apartment smelled like tomato soup and burnt garlic bread. Noah was arguing with Malik about basketball scores while Amelia studied anatomy flashcards across the table. Ordinary noise. Beautiful noise. Daniel stood quietly near the doorway watching them for a second longer than usual. Then Amelia looked up suddenly. "You look tired," she said softly. Daniel forced a faint smile. "Long day." Amelia kept watching him anyway. Because children who grew up loved properly learned how to recognize pain even when it arrived disguised as silence. The apartment grew quieter after the children left for college. Not empty. Just quieter in the way a house sounded after years of being needed every second. Malik moved to Philadelphia first for engineering work. Noah earned a scholarship to Columbia Law. Amelia entered medical school upstate after finishing near the top of her class. Daniel Brooks stood beside each of them on move-in days carrying boxes up narrow dormitory stairs while pretending not to notice how quickly childhood had disappeared. He always smiled in photographs. But afterward, driving back to Brooklyn alone in his old truck, he often kept the radio off for hours. The silence felt different now. Older somehow. Still, he never stopped working. Even at 63, Daniel continued taking maintenance jobs across the city because stopping meant thinking too much about medical bills folded inside kitchen drawers. The kidney treatments had become more frequent. More expensive too. Some mornings his hands trembled before he could even lace his work boots. Other days he sat inside the truck gripping the steering wheel until dizziness passed enough for him to drive safely. But whenever the children called, his voice sounded steady. "I am good, baby girl. Everything is handled. Just tired." He became skilled at making pain sound ordinary. One November evening, Daniel climbed the stairs to his apartment carrying 2 grocery bags and nearly collapsed before reaching the second-floor landing. The hallway tilted sharply beneath him. For a moment, all he could hear was the buzzing fluorescent light overhead and the pounding inside his chest. Mrs. Alvarez from apartment 3B opened her door at exactly the right moment. "Daniel," she gasped, rushing toward him. He steadied himself against the railing immediately. "I am all right." "No, you are not." But Daniel straightened anyway. Men like him spent entire lifetimes learning how to survive upright. The next morning brought another letter from the landlord taped directly onto his apartment door. Rent increase effective immediately. Final notice. Daniel stood there for a long time reading the paper while cold air drifted through the cracked hallway window nearby. 21 years in that apartment. 21 years of birthdays. Homework. Burned pancakes. Christmas mornings with second-hand decorations and too much laughter packed into tiny rooms. He had repaired half the building himself over the years without charging the owner once. Pipes. Wiring. Broken heaters during winter storms. None of it mattered now. 2 days later, the landlord arrived personally. Young man. Expensive coat. Polished shoes worth more than Daniel's monthly grocery budget. He glanced briefly around the apartment while speaking into his phone before finally lowering it. "Mr. Brooks, you are months behind current market rate." Daniel nodded quietly. "I have been trying to catch up." "This neighborhood changed," the landlord replied with a shrug. "You cannot expect sentiment to override business." Daniel looked toward the kitchen table where Amelia's old anatomy textbook still sat stacked beside Noah's debate trophies and Malik's framed graduation photo. Home reduced to square footage and payment history. Strange how quickly the world forgot sacrifices once money entered the conversation. "I just need a little time," Daniel said softly. The landlord sighed impatiently. "Sir, with respect, your children are grown. You are alone now. Maybe it is time to downsize." "Alone now." The word stayed in the apartment long after the man left. That evening Daniel packed quietly while rain tapped against the windows outside. 1 duffel bag. A few work clothes. Medication bottles hidden beneath folded socks. Victoria Sterling's photograph still tucked inside the old toolbox. He left most furniture behind because carrying memories hurt enough already. Around midnight, Daniel locked the apartment door for the final time. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint and radiator heat. Mrs. Alvarez cried softly while hugging him near the stairs. Daniel smiled gently anyway. "Thank you for being kind to my family," he whispered. Outside, the city moved on without noticing him. Yellow taxis splashed through puddles. Steam drifted from subway grates into the cold night air. Daniel sat alone at a bus stop beneath flickering streetlights with the old toolbox resting near his boots and a paper bag of medication balanced carefully beside him. His breathing sounded heavier now. Slower too. He stared down the empty street for several minutes before pulling his coat tighter against the cold. Then headlights appeared at the far end of the block. Black SUVs. Several of them. Moving slowly through the rain directly toward him. Daniel Brooks watched the black SUVs approach through sheets of cold rain, their headlights cutting pale ribbons across the wet Brooklyn street. Expensive vehicles did not belong in neighborhoods like this after midnight. Not unless somebody important had gotten lost. The convoy slowed near the bus stop before stopping completely beside the curb. For a moment, Daniel stayed seated beneath the flickering streetlight with his old toolbox resting near his boots and his paper bag of medication clutched loosely in one tired hand. He looked smaller tonight somehow. Not weak. Just worn down by years life had collected from him one quiet sacrifice at a time. The first SUV door opened slowly. Polished black dress shoes touched the pavement first. Then a tall man stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat dampened by rain. Daniel stared for half a second before recognition finally reached his face. Noah. Older now. Broader shoulders. Lawyer's posture. But still the same eyes from the frightened little boy who once slept holding Victoria Sterling's scarf inside a mansion too large to comfort him. Dad, Noah said softly. The word landed harder than the cold. Daniel blinked once behind tired eyes. He had not heard that voice in person for almost 6 months. Noah crossed the sidewalk quickly and crouched in front of him without caring that rain soaked through his expensive coat. Why are you sitting out here? He asked quietly. Daniel tried for a small smile. Bus was late. Noah's jaw tightened immediately because both of them knew that was not the truth. Another SUV door opened. Amelia stepped out next. Long camel-colored coat. Hair pinned loosely after what looked like an endless hospital shift. Elegant in the effortless way her mother once had been, but warmer somehow. Softer around the eyes. The second she saw the duffel bag beside Daniel's feet, her expression broke completely. No, she whispered under her breath. Daniel stood slowly as she reached him, though the movement clearly cost him more effort now. Amelia looked from the bag to the toolbox to the exhaustion written across his face. Then she noticed the medication bottle partially visible through the paper sack. Doctor instincts moved faster than emotion. What happened? She asked sharply. Daniel glanced away toward the rain-covered street. Just some rent problems. Noah looked furious now in the quietest way possible. The dangerous kind. You were evicted? Daniel did not answer immediately. Silence answered for him. Amelia pressed trembling fingers against her mouth for a second before stepping closer. Why did you not call us? Daniel exhaled softly. You both have lives. Careers. I did not want to become, he stopped there. Burden. The word remained unfinished between them anyway. Noah looked down at the wet sidewalk before laughing once under his breath. Not humor. Hurt. You worked 3 jobs so we could stay in school, he said quietly. You sold your truck once because my tuition payment was short. Daniel looked uncomfortable hearing those things spoken aloud. Noah continued anyway. You sat through every debate competition, every terrible school play, every graduation. And you thought we would let you sit alone at a bus stop? Amelia's eyes filled despite how hard she tried controlling it. Rain collected along Daniel's old jacket while she studied the exhaustion hidden behind his calm expression. Then she noticed something else. His hands. Slight tremor near the fingertips. Skin too pale beneath the streetlight. How long have you been sick? She asked carefully. Daniel's eyes shifted away again. Wrong answer already. Amelia understood immediately. Noah did too. Neither spoke for several seconds. Traffic hissed faintly through puddles nearby while steam drifted upward from subway grates into the cold air. Finally Noah reached down and picked up the old metal toolbox from beside the bench. The same box Daniel had carried through nearly every chapter of their lives. Come on, Noah said softly. You are coming home. Daniel frowned slightly. I do not have a home anymore. Amelia stepped closer then, resting one hand gently against his arm exactly the way he once comforted frightened children during thunderstorms. Yes, she whispered. You do. Daniel looked between them beneath the rain and city lights, something fragile moving quietly through his expression for the first time in years. But before he could answer, Noah opened the back SUV door wider. And inside, resting neatly across the leather seat, sat a familiar folded blanket from Daniel's old Brooklyn apartment. The drive through Manhattan felt unreal to Daniel Brooks. Rain streaked softly across the tinted SUV windows while city lights blurred into gold and white reflections against the glass. Noah sat beside him in silence, one hand resting near the old toolbox balanced carefully on the floorboard like something sacred. Amelia sat across from them reviewing medical notes on a tablet, though Daniel noticed she had not turned a single page in several minutes. She kept watching him instead. The same way doctors watched patients who scared them personally. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beneath the attention. "I am all right," he said quietly after a while. Amelia did not even look up from the screen. That sentence usually means the opposite. Noah almost smiled at that. Daniel glanced toward the folded blanket resting beside him on the leather seat. Blue fabric worn thin at the edges after years inside their old apartment. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly. Noah finally answered. "Mrs. Alvarez called me tonight." Daniel lowered his eyes. Of course she had. Noah stared out the rain-covered window before continuing. "She said you tried carrying those bags down the stairs by yourself." "I managed." "You collapsed on the second-floor landing." Daniel stayed silent after that. The SUV eventually turned into a quiet private driveway lined with trees glowing beneath soft landscape lights. Ahead stood a restored brownstone overlooking the river. Elegant without feeling cold. Warm light spilled through tall windows onto rain-dark pavement outside. Daniel frowned slightly as the vehicle slowed. "Whose place is this?" Noah looked at him carefully. "Yours." Daniel blinked once. "No," Amelia finally lowered the tablet. "Yes." The SUV stopped completely. For a moment, nobody moved. Rain tapped gently against the roof while Daniel stared at the house beyond the glass. Too large. Too beautiful. The kind of place men like him repaired for other people, never entered as owners. "I cannot accept this," he said quietly. Noah turned toward him fully now. "You already did." Daniel shook his head immediately. "Noah, the deed is already signed," Noah interrupted softly. 3 months ago. Daniel looked genuinely confused now. Amelia reached into her bag and pulled out a folded set of papers. "We were waiting for Christmas," she admitted. "Malik helped us renovate everything." Daniel stared at the documents without taking them. "You bought a house." Noah exhaled slowly through his nose. "You gave us one first." Silence filled the SUV after that. Not awkward silence. Emotional silence. The kind that arrived when love finally circled back toward the person who created it. Daniel looked away toward the river outside because his eyes had started betraying him slightly. He hated crying in front of people. Even family. Especially family. Noah opened the SUV door first and stepped into the rain before coming around to help Daniel out carefully. That was when Daniel noticed 2 more vehicles parked farther down the driveway. One belonged to Malik. The other carried hospital markings across the side. Amelia followed his gaze. "There is something else," she said gently. Daniel immediately stiffened. Instinct. Fear. Amelia stepped closer beneath the soft porch lights reflecting against the wet pavement. "I saw your lab results," she admitted quietly. Daniel's face changed instantly. Not anger. Just disappointment that the truth had finally caught him. "You went through my records?" he asked. "I am a doctor." "You are my daughter," he answered before realizing what he had called her. Amelia froze. So did Noah. The word hung softly between them beneath the rain. Daughter. Daniel looked down immediately afterward like he had revealed too much. But Amelia's eyes filled almost instantly. She stepped forward and wrapped both arms around him carefully. "Then let me help you like one," she whispered. Daniel closed his eyes briefly as Noah rested a steady hand against his shoulder beside them. For 21 years he had carried everyone else through fear, sickness, grief, rent notices, heartbreak, and uncertainty without asking the world for anything back. And now, standing beneath warm porch lights with rain cooling the city around them, Daniel Brooks realized something he never truly allowed himself to believe before. He was no longer carrying life alone. The hospital room overlooked the East River, where early winter fog drifted slowly across the water beneath pale morning light. Everything inside the room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of medical monitors and the soft hum of ventilation overhead. Daniel Brooks sat near the window wearing a gray hospital sweater instead of his old work jacket for the first time in years. Somehow the change made him look even older. Smaller too. His hands rested calmly across his lap, though the faint tremor had not disappeared completely. Amelia stood near the foot of the bed studying charts on her tablet while pretending not to watch him every few seconds. Noah paced slowly beside the coffee machine in the corner, legal files tucked beneath one arm out of habit more than necessity. Malik leaned against the wall near the doorway holding a paper cup gone cold an hour earlier. The room carried the strange silence families often shared before difficult moments. Nobody wanted to say the frightening thing out loud first. Daniel finally broke the silence himself. "You all need to go home and sleep." Noah let out a quiet breath through his nose. "You said that 6 hours ago." Daniel looked toward the dark circles beneath Noah's eyes. "And you still look exhausted." "Runs in the family," Noah replied softly. A faint smile touched Daniel's face before disappearing again. Amelia lowered the tablet slowly. "The transplant team confirmed a compatible donor this morning." Daniel's expression tightened immediately. "No," Amelia already expected that answer. "Dad, no," his voice stayed gentle. "Firm too. Nobody in this family is risking their health because my body got tired before I did." Malik looked down at the coffee cup in his hands. Noah rubbed one palm across the back of his neck while staring toward the floor. Amelia stepped closer to the bed. "You spent 21 years sacrificing for us without asking permission first." Daniel shook his head slightly. "That was different." "Why?" Amelia asked quietly. "Because you were the parent." Daniel looked away toward the river outside. The truth sat heavily inside him now. He had always known how to give love. Receiving it felt far more dangerous. "I am not afraid of dying," he admitted after a long silence. Noah stopped pacing immediately. Amelia's eyes softened painfully. Daniel continued staring toward the fog beyond the glass. He paused there. "Searching. I do not want my life to become everybody else's burden at the end." The room went completely still after that. Even the monitor sound suddenly felt louder. Malik slowly crossed the room first. He sat beside the bed quietly before speaking. "You know what I remember most from growing up?" Daniel frowned faintly. Malik smiled softly without humor. "Every winter when the heat broke in the building, you stayed awake all night fixing everybody else's radiators before ours." Daniel blinked once. Surprised. Malik continued. "Mrs. Alvarez. Mr. Green downstairs. The Jackson family with the baby." He shook his head gently. "You never acted like helping people made them burdens." Noah sat down across from them slowly now. "I remember you walking 6 blocks in the snow because you gave your subway money to me for a school trip." Amelia swallowed hard before adding quietly, "I remember you sitting beside me during anatomy finals after working 14 hours straight because you knew I was scared." Daniel lowered his eyes after that. The weight of being remembered properly seemed harder for him to carry than years of exhaustion ever were. Amelia finally moved beside him and rested one careful hand over his rough fingers. "You taught us what family means," she whispered. "Now let us practice it." Daniel looked at their faces one by one beneath the soft hospital light. Malik. Noah. Amelia. Children once frightened of being abandoned now sitting beside him refusing to leave. Something inside his chest gave way quietly then. Not pride. Not fear. Something softer. Older. Relief maybe. Real relief. His eyes filled before he could stop them. Daniel looked down immediately, embarrassed by emotion after spending an entire lifetime hiding it from the world. But Noah reached over and squeezed his shoulder gently while Amelia held his trembling hand tighter. Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. They did not need to. Because for the first time in many years, Daniel Brooks no longer felt like a man standing alone against life. Snow fell quietly across Manhattan the morning Daniel Brooks opened his eyes after surgery. The world outside the hospital window looked softer beneath winter light, like the city itself had finally lowered its voice for a moment. His body ached in slow waves beneath the blankets, heavy with exhaustion and medication, but for the first time in years the pain inside him no longer felt endless. Machines hummed steadily nearby. Somewhere down the hallway, nurses exchanged tired laughter during shift change. Ordinary sounds. Alive sounds. Daniel blinked slowly toward the ceiling before turning his head slightly. Noah sat asleep in the chair beside the bed, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt with legal documents scattered across his lap. Amelia rested curled beneath a hospital blanket near the window, shoes kicked off sometime during the night after another 18-hour shift. Malik leaned against the wall with his arms folded, asleep sitting upright in the most uncomfortable chair in the room because he refused to leave. Daniel stared at them quietly for several seconds. Then longer than that. His chest tightened unexpectedly beneath the weight of what he was seeing. People staying. People choosing him back. He had spent so much of his life believing love was something he gave outward that he never learned how to stand still inside it himself. Noah stirred first. "You are awake," he whispered immediately, sitting forward too fast. Daniel managed the faintest smile. "Looks expensive in here." Noah laughed softly through tired eyes. "Good. You are joking again." Amelia woke moments later, pushing loose hair back from her face before stepping beside the bed. Doctor instincts returned instantly despite exhaustion. "How is the pain?" she asked gently. "Manageable." She nodded once, studying the monitors carefully before relaxing slightly. Daniel noticed the relief hidden beneath her professionalism. It humbled him more than he could explain. Later that afternoon, after nurses adjusted medications and Malik left briefly for coffee, Amelia returned carrying a small envelope folded carefully between her fingers. She hesitated near the bed before handing it over. "What is this?" Daniel asked softly. "Something I wrote before surgery," she answered. Daniel looked uncertain immediately. "Amelia, just read it." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes betrayed too much emotion already. Daniel opened the envelope slowly with rough hands still weakened from treatment. Inside rested a single sheet of paper covered in Amelia's neat handwriting. He adjusted his glasses before reading silently. The room grew very still around him. "You never gave us your blood. But you gave us your life." Daniel stopped there for a moment, blinking hard against sudden pressure building behind his eyes. He continued reading anyway. "You taught Noah how to stand up without becoming cruel. You taught Malik that strength can be gentle. You taught me that love is not measured by money or biology or last names. It is measured by who stays when life becomes difficult." Daniel's hands trembled slightly now. Amelia lowered her gaze while he kept reading. "When everybody else looked at us and saw responsibility, inconvenience, headlines, or inheritance, you saw children. You never asked for anything back. Not once." The room blurred briefly before Daniel realized his eyes had filled completely. He lowered the letter slowly onto his lap. "Baby girl," his voice broke there. Amelia immediately sat beside the bed and held his hand carefully between both of hers. Noah looked away toward the snowy window to give him dignity through the emotion. Daniel swallowed hard before speaking again. "I was never trying to be special," he whispered. Amelia shook her head softly. "That is exactly why you were." Silence settled gently across the room after that. Not painful silence. Healing silence. The kind families earned after surviving enough together. Outside the hospital window, snow continued drifting over the river while evening lights slowly awakened across the city skyline. Daniel leaned back against the pillows holding Amelia's letter against his chest, surrounded by the children who once feared the world would forget them. And somewhere deep inside himself, after decades of carrying pain quietly through life, Daniel Brooks finally allowed himself to feel something he had denied for far too long. He felt loved. Spring arrived slowly that year. The trees along the river outside Daniel Brooks's new home began turning green again, one quiet branch at a time, and for the first time in decades, he noticed the seasons changing without rushing past them on the way to another job. Recovery was not dramatic. It happened through ordinary moments. Morning medication lying neatly beside black coffee that Amelia insisted was too strong for him now. Noah stopping by after court with groceries Daniel never remembered asking for. Malik repairing the loose kitchen cabinet even though Daniel could have fixed it himself in 5 minutes. Love looked different when people stayed long enough for daily life to reveal it. One Saturday afternoon, sunlight spilled warmly across the backyard while soft jazz drifted from an old speaker near the porch. Daniel sat in a wooden chair wearing a faded gray sweater and reading glasses low against his nose while pretending to read the newspaper. Mostly he was watching the people around him instead. Noah stood near the fence arguing with Malik about barbecue sauce while smoke curled upward from the grill into the bright spring air. Amelia knelt beside a flower bed helping Noah's young daughter press sunflower seeds carefully into the soil. The little girl laughed every few minutes in the same fearless way Noah once had as a child. Daniel listened quietly to all of it. The voices. The laughter. The ordinary peace. 21 years earlier, he had sat outside a mansion wondering whether two frightened children would be separated forever. Now those same children moved through life carrying pieces of his heart into rooms he never imagined entering himself. Amelia looked up from the garden suddenly and smiled toward him. "You are supposed to be resting," she called gently. Daniel lowered the newspaper slightly. "I am supervising." Noah laughed from beside the grill. "That sounds like retirement talk." Daniel shook his head faintly, though the smile remained this time. Retirement. The word still felt strange in his mouth. Men who spent their entire lives surviving rarely planned far enough ahead to imagine peace. A small pair of footsteps crossed the porch moments later. Noah's daughter climbed carefully into Daniel's lap carrying a half-finished drawing folded between tiny fingers. "Grandpa," she whispered proudly, "I made this for you." Daniel froze very slightly at the word. Grandpa. Nobody corrected it. Nobody needed to. He unfolded the paper slowly. Crayon drawings covered the page in uneven colors. A house beside a river. 3 adults smiling near flowers. One older man sitting in a chair beneath the sun while children played around him. At the top, written in crooked letters, were 4 simple words. "Our family stays together." Daniel stared at the drawing for a long moment before removing his glasses quietly. His vision had blurred again. Amelia noticed first, as she always did. But she looked away on purpose to protect his dignity. Noah did the same. Malik simply rested one hand against Daniel's shoulder as he walked past carrying fresh plates to the table. Small mercies. Quiet understanding. The kind families built over years instead of bloodlines. Evening settled slowly over the house later that night. Warm lights glowed through the windows while the river beyond the backyard reflected gold beneath the setting sun. Daniel sat alone on the porch after everyone else went inside, listening to distant laughter drifting through the screen door behind him. His old metal toolbox rested near the chair beside Victoria Sterling's faded photograph and Amelia's folded hospital letter he still carried everywhere now. The city skyline shimmered softly across the water in the distance. Beautiful. Calm. For most of his life, Daniel Brooks believed strength meant carrying pain without asking anyone for help. But age had taught him something gentler in the end. Real strength was allowing yourself to be loved after spending years believing you had to earn it first. He leaned back slowly in the porch chair as warm spring air moved through the trees around him. Inside the house, his family laughed together over dinner plates and old stories. Nobody was leaving. Nobody was afraid anymore. And for the first time since that storm 21 years earlier, Daniel no longer felt like a man surviving life one burden at a time. He finally felt at home.